The observation gallery of Apex Harmony Station stretched for half a kilometer, its transparent aluminum walls offering an unobstructed view of the spiral galaxy beyond. Dan Chen stood at the far end, hands clasped behind his back, watching the slow rotation of distant stars. He'd spent the last 3 hours studying the view, calculating stellar distances and radiation patterns purely from visual observation, a habit from his early days at the Lunar Stellar Engineering Academy. Behind him, the massive doors to the confluence chamber remained sealed. Inside, high crystalline Valora was making her final plea. "You're wasting energy on mental math," Ambassador Keiko Okonkwo said, approaching from the waiting area. Her formal diplomatic robes whispered against the polished floor. "The decision was made before we arrived." "I know." Dan turned from the window. At 43, he'd spent half his life studying stars. First Earth's sun, then every stellar classification humanity could reach. The faint lines around his eyes came from years of squinting at solar data, not age. But the data is interesting regardless. That K-class star in the Orion arm, it's showing early signs of helium flash instability. Dan. Keiko's voice carried the patient firmness that made her Earth's most effective diplomat. "Focus. When those doors open, we get one chance to make our case. The case is simple. The Valorians are dying. We can help. The Chrysani have already refused them. You think they'll let primitive humans succeed where they won't even try?" Dan's expression didn't change. "I think the Chrysani can't do it, and I think they'd rather watch a civilization die than admit their limitations." The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. The sound that emerged wasn't promising, a discordant mixture of clicking, harmonic tones and the distinctive crystalline chime of Valorian grief. Valora emerged first, where her species records showed beings of radiant clarity. She appeared clouded, her geometric form flickering at the edges. The dying light of her sun was taking her people with it, a slow dissolution of the crystalline matrices that formed their bodies. She moved past the human delegation without acknowledgement, pride keeping her upright despite visible deterioration. "Observers may enter," announced a confluence page, a small amphibious being whose translator rendered its speech in flat, bureaucratic tones. The confluence chamber made most human cathedrals look intimate. Arranged in concentric tiers based on political influence, the seating represented 467 species. The innermost ring belonged to the 7 elder races, species who'd achieved stellar civilization before Earth developed agriculture. The Chrysani hegemony occupied prime position, their delegation of 6 insectoid beings towering over adjacent seats. The human delegation's assigned position was in the outermost tier, behind species Dan had never heard of. Ambassador Okonkwo took the nominal lead position, but everyone knew Dan was the reason they'd been permitted to attend at all. His credentials as Earth's leading stellar engineer had earned humanity observer status. No voting rights, no formal voice, but the ability to witness proceedings. Supreme Architect Jathan dominated the Chrysani section. Nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton bore ritual scarification, marking centuries of technological achievement. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked, in rhythms his translator rendered with deliberate contempt. "The confluence acknowledges the presence of human observers. You may witness in silence as your betters conduct galactic affairs." Dan remained impassive. Keiko gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. "The matter of the Valorian petition is concluded," Jathan continued, addressing the full assembly. "The hegemony has determined that intervention in natural stellar processes violates fundamental principles of cosmic non-interference. The Valorian system's decay, while regrettable, represents stellar evolution that must proceed unimpeded. In the tier reserved for petitioners, Valora's form flickered more severely. The translator caught her whisper, 9 billion of my people. Evolution requires adaptation, Jathan said, not looking at her. The Valorians have contributed admirably to galactic culture. Their legacy will endure even as their biology proves incompatible with their changing stellar environment. Dan's hands tightened behind his back. He forced them to relax. A Thranduan representative, a being of tentacles and bioluminescent patterns, pulsed a question. The hegemony possesses stellar manipulation technology. Could the Valorian sun not be stabilized? Possession of capability does not mandate its deployment, Jathan replied. We must consider precedent. If the confluence authorizes intervention whenever a species faces stellar difficulties, where does such interference end? The cosmos operates by immutable physical laws. Our responsibility is observation and understanding, not playing deity with stellar mechanics. Dan pulled out a data tablet, fingers moving across its surface. Around him, other species observers did the same, recording, calculating, politicking. But Dan's fingers traced a different pattern, pulling astronomical data from the human delegation's discrete satellite network. The Valorian binary system appeared in 3 dimensions. 2 stars locked in gravitational embrace, the larger entering premature decay. You disagree with the hegemony's position, human? Dan looked up to find Jathan's multifaceted eyes fixed on him. Half the chamber turned to observe. Observer Chen was not recognized to speak, Keiko interjected smoothly. But he wishes to. I can see it in his primitive primate posturing. Jathan's mandibles spread in what might have been amusement. By all means, let us hear from the species who achieved faster-than-light capability a mere 2 centuries ago. Perhaps you can enlighten the confluence with insights from your, what do you call it, your yellow dwarf star? Dan set down the tablet. Sul. We call our star Sul. How quaint. You name your son as though it were a person. Jathan's translator captured every nuance of his disdain. And what wisdom does humanity offer? You who still struggle with basic stellar classification? A question, if I may. Dan's voice remained level, conversational. The Valorian system. Did your analysis determine the cause of the premature decay? Jathan's posture shifted slightly. Stellar mechanics are complex. The cause is less relevant than the inevitability of the outcome. So, you don't know. Dan picked up his tablet again. Because the decay pattern is unusual. The primary star is losing mass faster than stellar wind can account for. Something is extracting helium from the outer convective zone while destabilizing the core fusion equilibrium. Speculation from partial data, typical of younger species. I agree, it's speculation. Dan pulled up a holographic projection, broadcasting it to the chamber's central display with a casual swipe. The Valorian system appeared in full detail, overlaid with radiation spectrum analysis and mass distribution calculations. But if the cause is localized magnetic field disruption, possibly from interaction with a planetary magnetosphere that's shifted orbital position, then the decay isn't natural evolution. It's an accident, one that can be corrected. The chamber fell silent. Dan noted several elder race delegates leaning forward, their various sensory organs focusing on his projection. Jathan's clicking intensified. Irrelevant. The confluence has ruled. Actually, Keiko said, standing, the confluence has heard the hegemony's recommendation. But humanity, as an observer species, has the right to petition for emergency reconsideration if we can demonstrate new evidence that might alter the calculus of intervention. You have no such right. Article 47 of the Confluence Charter, ratified 6,000 years ago by the elder races. Keiko's smile was diplomatic steel. Any species, regardless of political standing, may petition in cases of imminent genocide if they possess unique expertise relevant to prevention. A Thranduan elder pulsed in what Dan's translator rendered as surprised approval. The human is correct. We wrote that provision after the Kesivar died while we debated trade protocols. It has not been invoked in millennia, but it remains valid. Jathan's exoskeleton darkened. And what unique expertise do humans claim? You are children playing with stellar models. Dan broadcast another image. Earth, blue and green and perfect, with Sol burning bright behind it. In approximately 7 billion years, our sun will enter red giant phase. Earth will be incinerated. We've known this for centuries, and we decided extinction was unacceptable. He advanced the projection, showing designs, calculations, experimental data. So we began studying stellar engineering, not for war, not for power, for survival. We've spent 150 years developing techniques to manipulate stellar fusion, to extend main sequence duration, to potentially move entire stars if necessary. Fantasies, but Jathan's translator carried less certainty. Experiments, Dan corrected. 70 years ago, we successfully extended a red dwarf's lifespan by 14% using magnetic field manipulation and strategic deuterium injection. 40 years ago, we stabilized a K-class star showing premature helium flash. 20 years ago, we successfully reignited a white dwarf through cascade fusion injection. The chamber erupted in multiple species versions of shocked disbelief. Impossible, Jathan declared. You lack the power generation alone to attempt such operations. We do, actually. Dan's expression remained neutral. Our sun might be a simple yellow dwarf, but it's our simple yellow dwarf. We learned everything we could about it. And then, we learned how to keep it alive forever, if necessary. He locked eyes with Jathan. I formally petition this confluence for permission to attempt stabilization of the Valorian system. I have complete technical specifications prepared. I can provide testimony from 50 human stellar engineers. We can save them. Denied. Jathan's voice cracked like breaking stone. Absolutely denied. The hegemony will not permit a primitive species to accomplish what you cannot. The words came from Valora. She had moved to the petitioner's tier, her form steadier now, crystalline structure resonating with desperate hope. Please, if there is any chance. There is no chance, Jathan interrupted. Because I hereby issue formal decree. No species shall render assistance to the Valorian system. Any attempt to interfere with natural stellar evolution in this case will be considered a violation of galactic law and will face hegemony response. Dan's tablet chimed softly. He glanced at it, then at Keiko. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. That's an interesting position, Dan said quietly. Forbidding aid, threatening force against rescue attempts, making sure billions die to preserve your monopoly on stellar technology. He paused. And your reputation. You dare, I dare observe facts. You can't save them. Your stellar manipulation technology is limited to basic solar wind redirection and minor magnetic field adjustment. You've never attempted core fusion stabilization because you don't know how, and you can't let anyone else try because that would expose your limitations. Jathan's exoskeleton flushed deep purple. The hegemony's capabilities are beyond question. We choose not to act, Not because we cannot, but because we must not set precedent for cosmic interference. Then you won't mind if we try. I mind very much. Human vessels entering Valorian space will be removed. Dan processed the threat. Removed. Not turned away. Removed. You're establishing a blockade? 15 hegemony warships now orbit the Valorian system's outer planets. They have orders to prevent any unauthorized entry, particularly by presumptuous primitive species who lack the wisdom to accept the natural order. Around the chamber, representatives shifted uncomfortably. The Thranduans pulsed distress patterns. Several smaller species delegates appeared agitated, but none spoke. The hegemony's economic and military power kept the confluence's usual voices silent. This is murder, Keiko said, abandoning diplomatic niceties. You're condemning billions to death to maintain your political dominance. This is order, Jathan corrected. Lesser species must learn their place, even if such lessons come with tragic costs. Perhaps humanity will learn humility by witnessing consequences of overreaching ambition. Dan stood slowly. He walked to the center of the chamber, each step measured, until he stood directly before the Crethony delegation's tier. Looking up at Jathan, he spoke with the same calm tone he used reviewing experimental data. We hear your position, and we remember it. The words hung in the chamber's recycled atmosphere. I expect you do, Jathan said. I also expect you will accept it. Return to your yellow dwarf and cease these embarrassing pretensions to expertise. The confluence has spoken. This matter is concluded. Dan turned to Keiko. Request formal consultation period? Ambassador Okonkwo, representing humanity, formally registers objection to this decree and requests 48 hours for consultation with Earth authorities. Granted, the Thranduan elder pulsed, though the hegemony's position is unlikely to change. Impossible, Jathan added. The blockade stands. The decree is absolute, and humanity will learn what happens to species who forget their place in the galactic order. Dan returned to his seat. His hands were steady as he gathered his tablet. As the confluence dissolved into smaller discussions and the session formally ended, Keiko leaned close. That went worse than expected. No, Dan said, pulling up a communication interface. It went exactly as expected. They threatened force against humanitarian aid. They've effectively sentenced the Valorians to extinction, and they've made it clear they'll destroy any human ship that enters the system. Keiko's frustration broke through her diplomatic training. How is this what you expected? Dan began composing a message to Earth, coding it with priority military encryption. Because now, we know exactly what we're dealing with. Arrogance, insecurity, technical limitations masked as policy. He paused, fingers hovering over the final transmission command. And most importantly, we know they'll use force to maintain their monopoly. Which means they've made the choice for us. Dan sent the message. Somewhere, 6 light years away, Earth's Defense Coordination Center would receive 3 words. Execute Prometheus Protocol. He stood, offering his arm to Keiko. Now we demonstrate why underestimating humanity is always a mistake. Through the chamber's viewing ports, stars wheeled an eternal dance. Among them, invisible at this distance, the Valorian sun continued its dying spiral. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, human ships began moving toward it. The galaxy would learn. Primitive species, they called us. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The private council chamber was smaller than the grand confluence hall, designed for difficult conversations rather than political theater. Dan Chen stood before the central holographic projector, hand steady as he loaded the presentation humanity had prepared. Around the circular room, representatives of the 23 major galactic powers occupied positions dictated by millennia of precedent. Jathan's delegation took the prime position directly opposite the projector. The Supreme Architect's exoskeleton still bore the deep purple flush from their earlier confrontation, a visible reminder of Krithani anger. Ambassador Okonkwo stood beside Dan, her diplomatic credentials granting her speaking rights even in this restricted forum. To their left, Elder Threndu Chanal's tentacles moved in slow, contemplative patterns, bioluminescent signals pulsing across her ancient form. The Eo Von observer, Whisper of Doubt, as its name translated, occupied no physical seat. Instead, the energy-based entity manifested as a coherent field of light near the chamber's upper tier, its presence causing minor fluctuations in nearby electronic systems. Valora had been granted petitioner status. She sat in the designated position, her crystalline form still flickering, but her geometric structure more stable than before. Hope, Dan recognized, could be temporarily sustaining even for a dying species. "This session is formally recorded," announced the Thranduan elder, her translator rendering her bioluminescent language into neutral tones. "Human delegation, you requested this gathering. Proceed." Dan activated the projector. The Valorian binary system materialized in 3 dimensions at the chamber's center, each planet rendered in precise detail. The dying stars' unstable radiation patterns visible as color-coded wavelengths. 72 hours from now," Dan began, his voice carrying the same measured calm he used in laboratory briefings. "The human stellar engineering vessel Prometheus will enter the Valorian system. We will position at a distance of 0.3 astronomical units from the primary star and begin cascade fusion injection procedures." He advanced the presentation. Technical schematics appeared. Power distribution networks, magnetic field manipulation arrays, fusion catalyst delivery systems. Each diagram bore complexity that made several delegates lean forward despite themselves. "The process requires 6 distinct phases," Dan continued. "First, deployment of 24 fusion injection arrays in a tetrahedral configuration around the star's equator. These arrays will establish magnetic field corridors penetrating to the star's radiative zone." Jathan's mandibles clicked sharply. "This is absurd. The energy requirements alone." "Phase 2, Dan continued without pause, "involves hydrogen-helium-3 injection through these magnetic corridors. Our calculations indicate 4.7 times 10 to the 31st grams of fuel material delivered over a 16-hour period will initiate the cascade reaction." "Impossible," Jathan interrupted. "No species possesses the power generation to maintain such magnetic fields while simultaneously—" Phase 3. Magnetic compression of the stellar core. By manipulating field lines on a stellar scale, we can increase core temperature by approximately 11%, sufficient to re-establish stable fusion equilibrium. Dan pulled up another schematic, this one showing power distribution that made even the Io Van observer pulse with what its translator rendered as surprise. Phase 4. Sustained catalyst injection to stabilize the cascade. Phase 5. Gradual reduction of external magnetic influence as the star achieves self-sustaining fusion. Phase 6. Array removal and system monitoring for 3 months to confirm stability. He deactivated the projection and faced the chamber directly. Total operation time, approximately 9 days. Probability of success based on our experimental data, 87.3%. Probability of catastrophic failure, negligible. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then Jathan's laughter erupted, a harsh clicking sound his translator rendered with deliberate cruelty. "This is your plan? This fantasy?" He rose from his position, exoskeleton darkening with contempt. You cannot even move a solar flare, yet you propose manipulating stellar fusion itself? We've done it before, Dan replied. 3 times, as I stated in the full confluence. Experimental verification under controlled conditions. On dwarf stars barely worth the classification. On systems no civilized species would inhabit. Jathan's mandibles spread wide. This is an infant species playing with models they don't understand, pretending expertise they cannot possess. We understand quite well. Dan pulled up his data tablet, fingers moving across its surface with practiced efficiency. Would you like to review our calculations? I can provide complete mathematical verification for each phase. Your mathematics are irrelevant because your capability is non-existent. You do not possess the power generation. You do not possess the magnetic field manipulation technology. You do not possess the material science to withstand stellar radiation at such proximity. Jathan turned to address the other delegates. This is precisely why primitive species require guidance. They literally cannot comprehend the magnitude of their own ignorance. Elder Chanel's tentacles pulsed a careful pattern. Supreme Architect, the human presentation demonstrates considerable theoretical sophistication. Perhaps theory means nothing without capability, and humanity's capabilities are centuries behind what this operation would require. Jathan's eyes fixed on Dan. Your entire species couldn't move a single solar flare, yet you presume to reignite a dying star? Yes, Dan said simply. The word hung in the recycled atmosphere. We will be there in 72 hours, Dan continued, voice steady as equations. We will execute the procedure exactly as described, and we will save 9 billion Valorian lives. He advanced the presentation once more. This time, a trajectory map appeared. Human space to Valorian space, marked with precise timestamps and navigation waypoints. We're informing you as a courtesy. We're providing complete technical specifications so any species with the capability can verify our work. We're doing this transparently because we believe the galaxy benefits from shared knowledge. Dan paused, making eye contact with each major delegation. But make no mistake, we are doing this. The Krathani blockade is illegal under Confluence emergency provisions. We will not honor it. Jathan's exoskeleton flushed nearly black. You dare? We recognize no authority, Ambassador Okonkwo interjected, her diplomatic training producing words with surgical precision that would demand we witness genocide through inaction. The Confluence Charter's emergency provisions supersede any single species' territorial claims. The Valorians have requested aid. We possess the capability to provide it. Under these circumstances, interference with humanitarian assistance constitutes an act of war. War? Jathan's translator caught every nuance of his incredulity. You threaten the hegemony with war? We state a fact, Okonkwo replied. If Krathani vessels fire upon human ships engaged in legitimate rescue operations, we will defend ourselves. I trust this clarifies our position. The Eovan observer pulsed a complex pattern. Its translator required 7 seconds to render the thought into words. The humans demonstrate unusual confidence. This observer finds the disparity between claimed capability and apparent technological development intriguing. It's delusion, Jathan snapped. Primitive arrogance mistaking fantasy for capability. Dan pulled up one more image. Earth, blue and green and perfect, with Sul burning behind it. We've been preparing for this moment for 150 years, ever since we calculated our sun's eventual red giant phase and decided extinction was unacceptable. Every technology we developed, every experiment we conducted, every resource we invested, all focused on a single goal: learning to keep stars alive. He looked directly at Jothan. You call us primitive. You call us children. You're not entirely wrong. By galactic standards, we are young. But we're not playing at stellar engineering. It's been our species' primary scientific focus for a century and a half. While you maintained your monopolies and hoarded your knowledge, we were solving the problem of stellar death. And we succeeded. More fantasy. Then you have nothing to fear from our attempt, Dan replied. If we fail, you'll be vindicated. If we succeed, he shrugged slightly. Then, perhaps the galaxy learned something useful. Elder Chanel's bioluminescence shifted through several colors, a pattern her species used to indicate deep contemplation. Humanity requests no resources from the confluence, no military escort, no technological assistance. We need nothing but the right to try, Okonkwo confirmed. Though we do formally notify the confluence that any species wishing to observe our work is welcome. We'll be broadcasting all data in real time. Complete transparency. How remarkably naive, Jothan said. Offering your supposed secrets to anyone watching. Knowledge isn't power, Dan replied. Application of knowledge is power. And we're confident in our application. Valora's form suddenly brightened, her crystalline structure resonating with harmonics her translator rendered as barely contained emotion. You truly believe you can save us? Dan turned to face her. Hi, Crystalline. I don't deal in belief. I deal in mathematics and experimental verification. Based on our data, yes, we can stabilize your sun. We can give your people another 10 billion years of stable stellar radiation, but only if we're permitted to try. You have my people's permission, Valora said, her form flickering with what Dan now recognized as crystalline tears. We grant access to our system. We welcome your help. Her voice broke. We dare to hope. Hope is premature, Jothan declared. I hereby order the hegemony fleet to maximum readiness. Any human vessel entering Valorian space will be fired upon. Any attempt to approach the stellar system will be prevented by all necessary force. He pointed a clawed appendage at Dan. Your theatrical warnings change nothing. The hegemony will not permit this violation of cosmic order. Then we're at an impasse, Okonkwo said. No. You're at a choice. Jothan's translator carried absolute finality. Abandon this delusion and return to your yellow dwarf, or watch as your ships are reduced to expanding gas clouds. And those are your options. Dan closed his data tablet with a soft click. We choose a third option. We save the Valorians. And you choose how you respond to that. He glanced at the chamber's chronometer. 72 hours, Supreme Architect. We'll be there. The question is whether you'll force us to demonstrate our full capabilities in the process. Your capabilities are nil. Then watch. Dan gathered his materials, nodded to Okonkwo. We've delivered our warning. We've provided complete technical documentation. We've stated our intentions and timeline. The confluence is informed. History will note what happens next. As they turned to leave, Elder Chanel pulsed one more question. Human Engineer Chen, what gives you such certainty? What makes you so confident in untested procedures against overwhelming opposition? Dan paused at the chamber door. Because we've been underestimated before. We've been called primitive, backwards limited, and every time we've proven that assessment was based on insufficient data. He smiled slightly. Plus, our procedures aren't untested. We've run them successfully 3 times. This will be the 4th. He left the chamber, Okonkwo at his side, while behind them, the representatives of 23 galactic powers erupted into chaos. The Valorian star, burned wrong. Captain Sarah Osei had studied enough stellar classifications to recognize sick light when she saw it. The reddish-orange pallor of a star losing its battle with entropy. Through Prometheus's forward viewports, the dying sun cast its failing radiation across 3 inhabited worlds that needed it to live. Crithani fleet holding position at 9 astronomical units, her tactical officer reported. 15 vessels, destroyer class through dreadnought. They've locked targeting sensors on our position. Acknowledged. Osei stood at her command station, hands clasped behind her back in unconscious mimicry of Dan Chen's habitual posture. Across the bridge, her crew moved with practiced efficiency. Calm, despite the Crithani fleet. Calm, despite the historic significance of this moment. Calm, because they drilled for this scenario 800 times. Prometheus stretched 15 kilometers from bow to stern. Not a warship, though no warship in the galaxy could match its power signatures. Every structural element, every system, every component optimized for a single purpose: keeping stars alive. Crithani hailing us, communications reported. Audio and visual. On screen. The view screen shifted, replacing the dying star with the mandible-lined face of Admiral Krishak. His exoskeleton bore military scarification rather than Jathan's technological marks, and his translator rendered his voice with professional military precision rather than contempt. Human vessel Prometheus. I am Admiral Krishak, commanding Hegemony Border Defense Fleet. You have entered restricted space in violation of Confluence Decree. Turn back immediately or be fired upon. Osei studied him for 2 seconds, noting the positioning of his fleet, the weapons' hardpoints visible on each vessel, the power readings her sensors were collecting. Admiral, I'm Captain Sarah Osei, commanding Prometheus. We're here on humanitarian mission authorized by the Valorian government. We have no hostile intent toward your vessels. Intent is irrelevant. You were warned. Turn back. Can't do that, Admiral. Osei's voice remained conversational. We've got a star to save. I suggest you move your ships to safe distance. Approximately 12 astronomical units should be sufficient. We'd hate for stellar radiation fluctuations to damage your vessels during the restoration process. Krishak's mandibles twitched, uncertainty rather than anger. You were given direct warning. Supreme Architect Jathan's orders were explicit. I understand, but here's the situation from our perspective, Admiral. 9 billion sentient beings are dying. We can save them. Therefore, we will save them. Your fleet's presence doesn't change that calculus. Then your ship will be destroyed. You're welcome to try. The transmission ended. Krishak's face disappeared, replaced by the Valorian star, and by the sudden power signatures of 15 Crithani warships charging weapons. All hands prepare for defensive operations, Osei announced across shipwide channels. Engineering, bring shields to full. I want spatial fold generators at maximum efficiency. From his station in the stellar engineering bay, Dan Chen's voice came through clearly. Captain, we're ready to deploy arrays on your signal. Recommend we ignore the Crithani entirely and proceed with mission objectives. Weapons fire, tactical called. Multiple plasma cannon shots, torpedo launches. Admiral, they're firing everything they have. Through the viewports, space lit up with weapons discharge. Plasma bolts that could slag a city struck Prometheus's shields and simply vanished, their energy absorbed into spatial folds that redirected the force into higher dimensions. Torpedoes designed to crack battleship hulls detonated against barriers that might as well have been universal constants. Prometheus continued forward, neither accelerating nor evading, moving through the Crithani assault like a whale through plankton. Damage report, Osei requested, knowing the answer. Shields at 99.97% efficiency. Minor power fluctuation in generator 4. Already compensated. Captain, their weapons can't touch us. Osei opened a channel. Admiral Krishak, please cease fire. You're wasting ammunition. We're not here to fight, but we're also not going to turn back because you're shooting at us. Stand down and let us work. The Krithani response was another volley, this time concentrated fire from all 15 ships simultaneously. The combined firepower could have sterilized a planetary surface. It splashed against Prometheus's shields like rain against a mountain. They've stopped, Tactical reported. Weapons powered down, ships, holding position. Admiral, I'm reading confusion in their formation. They're not maneuvering like they know what to do next. Wouldn't you be confused? Osei smiled slightly. Dan, we're clear to begin operations. Deploying arrays, Dan confirmed. Through the viewports, humanity's stellar engineering technology became visible. From Prometheus's equatorial ports, 24 massive constructs emerged, each one 3 kilometers across, unfolding like mechanical flowers. Hexagonal panels spread outward, revealing crystalline cores that pulsed with contained power. The arrays moved under their own propulsion, taking up positions around the Valorian star in a configuration that had taken 50 years to perfect. On the Valorian homeworld, Valora stood in her crystalline garden and watched humanity's machines begin their work. For the first time in 3 years, her form held steady. Hope had structure. She could see it unfolding against her dying sun. This is Prometheus to all observing vessels. Dan's voice broadcast across every standard communication channel. We're beginning phase 1 of stellar restoration. To any species monitoring our work, welcome. All technical data is available on open channels. We encourage observation, verification, and questions. He paused, manipulating controls that would route power equivalent to Earth's total energy consumption for a century through systems designed to reshape stellar matter. We're not doing this in secret. We're not hoarding knowledge, because the galaxy deserves better than darkness when stars fail. The arrays activated. Magnetic field lines became visible as they penetrated the star's outer layers. Humanity's technology making the invisible manifest, writing equations in light across stellar plasma. In his flagship, Admiral Krishak watched instruments that made no sense. Power readings that shouldn't be possible from a vessel that size. Magnetic field manipulation on scales that required understanding his own species had never achieved. And worst of all, the calm confidence in the human captain's voice. The absolute certainty that this absurd plan would work. He opened a channel to Apex Harmony Station, where Supreme Architect Jathan waited for news of human failure. My architect, Krishak said quietly, I believe we may have significantly underestimated the humans. On the view screen, against the dying light of a sun 9 billion beings needed to survive, humanity's machines began rewriting the rules of what primitive species could accomplish. The first impossible thing was happening, and everyone was watching. The Valorian star's transformation reached critical threshold at the precise moment Admiral Krishak's reinforcement fleet dropped from FTL. 200 Krithani warships emerged into a system they expected to find in chaos. Human vessels destroyed, stellar engineering arrays scattered, the primitive species taught their place in the galactic order. Instead, they arrived to witness resurrection. Dan Chen stood in Prometheus's stellar observation bay, hands steady on the control interface, watching fusion cascade through the star's core. 7 days of continuous work had brought them to this moment. 7 days of precisely timed hydrogen-helium, 3 injections, magnetic field manipulation on scales that rewrote physics textbooks, power expenditure that would have bankrupted most civilizations. Core temperature stabilizing at optimal fusion equilibrium, his lead engineer reported, voice tight with restrained emotion. Helium flash cascade is self-sustaining. magnetic compression can be reduced to maintenance levels. Through the observation ports, the star blazed. Not the sickly red-orange of dying fusion, but pure, healthy stellar light. The 24 arrays positioned around its equator pulsed in synchronized harmony, their magnetic field lines visible as luminous threads stitching stability into stellar plasma. Phase 6 initialization, Dan announced across all channels. Human, Valorian, and the Galactic Observation Network, where 467 species watched with varying degrees of disbelief. Beginning systematic withdrawal of external magnetic influence, the star will maintain stable fusion independently. On the forward view screen, Admiral Krishak's face appeared, his mandibles frozen in an expression his translator couldn't render. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed Krithani officers staring at instruments that contradicted everything their civilization believed possible. "You actually did it," Krishak said quietly. "You saved them." "We told you we would," Captain Ose replied from her command station. "Though we appreciate you holding fire while we worked. That was honorable of you, Admiral." Supreme Architect Jathan ordered immediate attack upon our rival. Krishak's exoskeleton shifted colors. Uncertainty, Dan's cultural database suggested. "But I watched your broadcasts. I reviewed your mathematical proofs. He paused. "I convinced my fleet commanders to observe rather than engage. If humans could truly accomplish stellar resurrection, destroying such capability would be a crime against the galaxy itself." "You made the right choice," Dan said, pulling up final verification calculations. "Star will achieve complete stability in approximately 40 minutes. At that point, we'll begin array recovery operations. Admiral, I recommend your fleet maintain current position at 12 astronomical units. We're about to release several trillion joules of excess magnetic field energy, and I'd prefer not to accidentally disable your vessels." "Accidentally?" Krishak's translator caught the dry humor. "Human engineer, nothing about your species appears accidental." Before Dan could respond, a new contact emerged from FTL. A single human vessel, larger than Prometheus, power signature dwarfing anything the Krithani fleet could generate. The HDSV Archimedes translated into reality with mathematical precision, accompanied by 49 additional ships that materialized in perfect formation. The human defense fleet had arrived. "This is Admiral Marcus Washington, Human Defense Fleet, broadcasting to all vessels in system." The voice carried calm authority. 60 years of military experience distilled into absolute confidence. "To the Krithani fleet, stand down and prepare to receive diplomatic contact. To the Valorian people, Earth sends greetings and congratulations on your star's rebirth. To the galaxy watching, what you're about to witness is not a threat, but a promise." On every view screen, every observation satellite, every FTL communication channel broadcasting to the confluence and beyond, space itself began to change. The Krithani fleet, 200 warships representing a quarter of hegemony military strength, simply stopped. Not disabled, not damaged, not destroyed. Frozen. Spatial manipulation technology locked each vessel in place, holding them suspended in space-time fields that rendered conventional physics temporarily irrelevant. Dan watched his instruments register the effect. Humanity's most carefully guarded technology developed not from weapons research, but from the simple question: if we can manipulate stellar magnetic fields, what else can we reshape? Spatial fold generators operating at 94% efficiency, Washington's tactical officer reported. All Krithani vessels secured. No damage to their systems, they're just unable to move. Admiral Krishak's face on the view screen showed no panic, only resignation. "We cannot even fire our weapons. Our power systems remain active, but all maneuvering capability." He met Washington's gaze with unexpected dignity. We are completely at your mercy, Admiral. Yes, Washington acknowledged. You are. The word hung in the void. 150 years ago, Washington continued, his broadcast reaching across light years to every civilization capable of receiving it, humanity calculated that our sun would eventually enter red giant phase. Sol, our simple yellow dwarf, as Supreme Architect Jathan called it, would expand and incinerate Earth. We faced a choice: accept extinction as natural stellar evolution, or develop technology to survive it. On the Valorian homeworld, Valora stood in her crystalline garden, watching her sun blaze with renewed life, while listening to the human admiral explain how this miracle became possible. We chose survival, Washington said. We invested everything: resources, research, the dedication of our brightest minds for generations, into a single goal: learning to keep stars alive. The power generation technology you're now witnessing, developed to fuel stellar manipulation systems. The spatial manipulation holding your fleet, originally designed to move solar plasma on stellar scales. Our shields that absorbed your weapons fire, created to withstand radiation environments close to stellar cores. He paused, letting the galaxy process the revelation. Every capability we've demonstrated came from peaceful research aimed at preventing our own extinction. We learned to move stars, reshape fusion dynamics, manipulate space-time itself. And, you... Washington's voice hardened slightly. Thought we couldn't move your ships? Through Prometheus's observation bay, Dan watched the star complete its transformation. Fusion cascades stabilized. Core temperature optimal. Magnetic field patterns showing harmonious complexity that would sustain this system for 10 billion years. The arrays began their withdrawal sequence, having accomplished what the Crithani claimed was impossible. We need to discuss the Supreme Architect's decision, Dan said, opening a direct channel to Apex Harmony Station, where Jathan waited with the confluence. Specifically, his claim that the Crithani refused to help the Valorians because of principles about cosmic non-interference. Jathan's image appeared on the view screen. His exoskeleton darkened to near black. Rage or shame, Dan's database suggested. Possibly both. Behind him, representatives of the elder races watched with expressions ranging from fascination to horror. The truth, Dan continued, voice calm as equations, is simpler and sadder. The Crithani couldn't save the Valorians. Your stellar manipulation technology is limited to basic solar wind redirection and minor magnetic field adjustments. You've never attempted core fusion stabilization because your physics models don't account for cascade reactions in stellar environments. You couldn't do it. He pulled up comparative technical specifications, Crithani technology versus human capability, the disparity visible in every metric. Rather than admit limitations, you issued decrees forbidding aid. You established military blockades to prevent anyone else from trying. You were willing to let 9 billion beings die to preserve your reputation as the galaxy's stellar engineering experts. Dan's expression remained neutral, but his words carried surgical precision. We could have announced our capabilities years ago. We chose not to, hoping for peaceful integration. You forced this revelation, Supreme Architect. Remember that. The star blazed pure and perfect, mathematical proof written in fusion light. The Valorian primary star is now stable. Dan broadcast to the galaxy. Projected lifespan, 10.3 billion years plus or minus 200 million. All technical data is available on open channels. We invite verification from any species with stellar physics expertise. We welcome questions, collaboration, and peer review. He deactivated the arrays one by one, each massive construct folding back into transport configuration. 7 days of continuous operation, and humanity's technology showed no signs of degradation. No material failures, no power system weaknesses, just engineering excellence applied to cosmic scale. On Valora's homeworld, the crystalline being who had traveled to apex harmony in desperation now stood beneath healthy stellar radiation for the first time in 3 years. Her geometric form stabilized, coherence restored. She wept tears that refracted light into spectrum patterns her species used for joy. "They saved us," she broadcast to her people, to the confluence, to the galaxy beyond. The humans, the species we barely knew, who owed us nothing, who faced military threat and political opposition, they saved us anyway. Admiral Washington opened another channel, this time addressing Admiral Krishak directly. "Your fleet is secured. You have no offensive capability. Under normal military doctrine, you're our prisoners. However, humanity has no interest in subjugation or conquest. We're going to release your vessels shortly. But first, Supreme Architect Jathan needs to understand the terms of what happens next." Jathan's image on the screen showed a being coming apart, not physically, but psychologically. Centuries of assumed supremacy, generations of Krithani dominance shattered in 7 days by the species he'd called primitive children. "Terms?" Jathan's translator caught the brittleness in his voice. "You dare dictate terms to the hegemony?" "Not dictate," Washington corrected. "Require. The Krithani hegemony's monopoly on stellar technology ends today. Your military will submit to galactic oversight. You will issue formal apology to the Valorian people for denying them aid, and you will cooperate with the new galactic order that's about to emerge." "Never. The hegemony will not." "The hegemony," Admiral Krishak interrupted, his voice cutting across his superiors, "will accept these terms. Because they are just, because we were wrong, and because the alternative is extinction through pride." On his flagship bridge, Krishak stood, mandibles clicking in patterns that his translator rendered as formal military declaration. "I, Admiral Krishak, Senior Fleet Commander present, hereby surrender Krithani forces to human authority. Supreme Architect Jathan, you are relieved of command. Your decisions have endangered our species and brought shame to our civilization. You will face trial before the Council of Architects for incompetence and reckless endangerment." "You cannot," Jathan began. "I can and I do. Guards, place the Supreme Architect under arrest." Through the FTL communication link, the galaxy watched Krithani security forces escort their leader from the confluence chamber. Jathan's rage dissolved into pleading, then silence. The being who had threatened genocide through inaction now faced judgment from his own people. Dan closed the stellar engineering interface. The arrays were secured, the star was saved, and the impossible thing was complete. He made his way to Prometheus's bridge, where Captain Ose stood watching the aftermath of their victory. "Dan Chen," Admiral Washington's voice came through, carrying warmth beneath the military formality. "Outstanding work. Sol would be proud." "Sol's had 4.5 billion years to perfect stable fusion," Dan replied. "We just helped the Valorian star remember how." He pulled up his personal communication channel, the one connected directly to the Valorian homeworld. "Hi, crystalline Valora. Your son lives." Her response came as harmonic resonance, crystalline joy that her translator rendered as words, but conveyed as pure emotion. "You risked war for us. You faced a fleet of 200 warships to save people you'd never met. How do we thank you for our existence?" "Help us build something better," Dan said. "A galaxy where knowledge is shared, where technological advancement benefits everyone, where no species has to face stellar death alone." That's all the thanks we need. The emergency reformation of the galactic confluence took place 3 weeks after the Valorian star's resurrection. Representatives from 847 species gathered. Physical beings and energy-based entities, crystalline minds and collective consciousnesses, civilizations ancient beyond human measurement and species who had achieved FTL capability within the last century. Ambassador Okonkwo stood at the petitioner's position, no longer relegated to the outer tier. Beside her, Dan Chen reviewed data on his tablet, while the confluence chamber filled. Captain Osei had remained with Prometheus in the Valorian system, overseeing the joint human-Valorian stellar monitoring station they'd established. Elder Thranduan Shanal's tentacles pulsed a formal convening pattern. This confluence meets to address fundamental restructuring of galactic order. The human intervention in the Valorian crisis has demonstrated both capability and character unprecedented in recent galactic history. Proposal: immediate elevation of humanity to full council status with voting privileges. Seconded, chimed a dozen species simultaneously. All in favor? Shanal's bioluminescence shifted through voting spectrum. The chamber erupted in affirmatives, harmonic tones, bioluminescent pulses, electromagnetic signals, verbal declarations in 300 languages. When the count finished, the results were overwhelming. 835 in favor, 12 abstentions, 3 opposed. Motion carries, Shanal declared. Humanity is granted full council status effective immediately. But the Thranduan elder wasn't finished. Her tentacles moved through patterns that Dan's cultural database identified as historically significant. The gestures used only for civilization-altering pronouncements. Additional proposal, Shanal continued. Establishment of Earth as one of the 7 pillars. Species entrusted with maintaining galactic infrastructure, mediating major disputes, and shepherding younger civilizations. This designation has not been granted in 4,000 years. The silence that followed carried weight. The Iovan observer manifested more fully than Dan had seen before, its energy-based form coalescing into something approaching physical presence. When it spoke, its translator required 10 seconds to render thoughts that existed beyond normal linguistic structure. This observer has existed since this galaxy's formation, Whisper of Doubt said. This observer has witnessed species rise and fall, civilizations achieve greatness and collapse into stagnation. This observer declares, humans demonstrate the ancient duty's essence, nurturing life against cosmic indifference. They are worthy. Valora rose from her position, crystalline form blazing with restored health. The humans risked everything to save strangers. They faced military threat with courage, technological challenge with brilliance, and political opposition with principles. If Earth is not worthy of this honor, no species is. Admiral Krishak, attending via FTL link from Krathani space where reformist government struggled to rebuild after Jathan's deposition, added his voice. The Krathani people recognize our errors. We hoarded knowledge when we should have shared it. We claimed expertise we didn't possess. Humanity's approach, open collaboration, freely shared technology, peaceful application of overwhelming capability, shows the path we should have followed. We support their elevation. All in favor? Shanal pulsed the pattern again. This time, the affirmatives were even stronger. 847 votes cast, 844 in favor. Ambassador Okonkwo stood, diplomatic composure barely containing her emotion. On behalf of Earth and humanity, we accept this honor and its responsibilities. But we propose immediate restructuring of galactic scientific cooperation. The old model, elder species hoarding technology, younger civilizations dependent on shared scraps, must end. We propose the Open Galaxy Initiative. Dan activated his tablet, broadcasting humanity's vision to every species present. Shared scientific knowledge, collaborative development, open-source technological advancement. Any species breakthrough becomes every species' opportunity. Mutual defense against cosmic threats, and most importantly, no civilization faces stellar death alone. Ever. 43 species have already requested human assistance with stellar engineering projects, Okonkwo continued. Earth commits to training programs, shared technology, and collaborative research. But all advancements must be freely available. No monopolies, no hoarding, no political leverage through technological superiority. Ambitious, Chanel observed, her translator catching a note that might have been approval. Perhaps impossible. 3 weeks ago, resurrecting a dying star was impossible, Dan replied. We've learned that impossible just means no one's solved it yet. The Thranduan elders' bioluminescence shifted through complex patterns, amusement, respect, and something Dan's database labeled as anticipation. Full disclosure, we suspected human capabilities for years. Our deep space sensors detected anomalous energy signatures from Sol system, power generation that shouldn't exist in a civilization of your supposed technological level. We waited to see your character before making formal contact. You were testing us, Okonkwo said. Observing. Humanity could have revealed your capabilities through conquest, through economic leverage, through political manipulation. Instead, you chose to reveal them through rescue, through sacrifice for strangers, through teaching rather than dominating. Chanel's tentacles moved in gestures of profound respect. You passed the test we didn't tell you existed. The Eovan observer pulsed agreement. Ancient duty, nurturing life against cosmic indifference. Humans understand this instinctively. When faced with stellar death, you didn't accept extinction. You developed technology to prevent it. When faced with others' stellar death, you risked war to save them. This is the essence of galactic civilization's highest calling. Over the next 6 hours, the confluence dismantled 4,000 years of established order and rebuilt it around humanity's vision. The Open Galaxy Initiative passed with near-unanimous support. 43 species formally requested stellar engineering assistance, and Earth committed teams to each. Joint research facilities were established across a dozen worlds. The Krithani hegemony's military underwent restructuring under galactic oversight, with Admiral Krishak leading the reformation. And in the Valorian system, under a star that would burn bright for 10 billion years, humanity's first interstellar stellar monitoring station broadcast continuous data to any species interested in learning. Dan Chen stood at the observation window of Apex Harmony Station, watching stars wheel in their eternal dance. Ambassador Okonkwo joined him. Her formal robes traded for comfortable civilian attire now that the political theater had concluded. Primitive species, they called us, she said quietly. They won't make that mistake again, Dan replied. But that was never the point. The point was the Valorians. 9 billion beings who get to live now. That's what matters. You know what happens next, Okonkwo said. Every species with a stellar problem will come to us. Every dying star, every unstable fusion reaction, every civilization facing the same crisis the Valorians faced. We've made ourselves responsible for the galaxy's stars. Dan smiled. Good. Because we've been preparing for this moment for 150 years. Ever since we calculated Sol's red giant phase and decided extinction was unacceptable, we learned to keep stars alive. He turned from the window, tablet already pulling up the next set of stellar engineering challenges. Now, we teach everyone else. Through the station's transparent aluminum walls, the galaxy turned. 400 billion stars, each one a potential home to civilizations that might one day face the same choice humanity had faced: accept cosmic indifference or develop technology to overcome it. Humanity had chosen to overcome. And now, that choice belonged to everyone. The primitive species had brought their star back to life. And in doing so, they'd changed the galaxy forever.